From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Carol Rappaport, and I work for the Congressional Research Service. And I'm delighted to introduce Andrea Davis Pinkney and Brian Pinkney, the author. Yay! Wow, we didn't even have to wait for my clap pauses. The author and illustrator of Hand in Hand, 10 Black Men That Changed America. I work in health policy, and in my job, I see so much evidence that Black men are left holding the short end of the stick. Hand in Hand is a wonderful counter to short ends. It reminds us, over time, Black men have been successful achievers, brave transformers, and courageous dreamers. These 10 Black men are truly inspirational. At least, they inspire me. And if you haven't noticed, I'm not a Black man. Andrea Davis Pinkney is the New York Times best-selling author of numerous books for children and young adults. She writes picture books, novels, nonfiction, and historical fiction. Her works include Let It Shine, Stories of Black Women Freedom Fighters, and Bird in a Box. Brian Pinkney has illustrated many books, including The Faithful Friend and The Dream Keeper and Other Poems. The Pinkneys also wrote and illustrated Duke Ellington, the piano player and his orchestra. Hand in Hand won the 2013 Coretta Scott King Award. I was going to say how many awards in total the Pinkneys' books have won, but I got tired of counting that high. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Davis Pinkney and Brian Pinkney.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I guess my microphone is working. I am so happy to be here. I often joke, I don't need a microphone. I'm a small person with a big mouth. But I'm happy to have a microphone this afternoon, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I'm going to start with a song. And you may know this since we're in Washington, so if you know it, you can sing along. Only chain that a man can stand is that chain called hand in hand. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. This is the story of 10 bold men who built a chain called Hand in Hand, each man a link in this mighty strand, reaching, pulling, believing, achieving, working toward freedom, hand in hand. Now, why would an African-American woman write a book about 10 Black men who changed America? And what gives me the right to do that? Well, let me say, I see a lot of young people in the audience here this afternoon. I see some beautiful young faces. You two young ladies, can you tell me, what is your name? Nice and loud. Claire. Claire, how old are you? 10? Claire, you are 10. What grade are you in? 5th grade. Claire is 10 and in the 5th grade. Claire, that is the age and the stage. 10 years old in the 5th grade. I had many 5th graders, 10-year-olds, boys, girls, black, white, approaching me, saying, I have to do a lot of reading for school. I have to read about notable African Americans. I do not want a book that is yucky spinach. I'm sick of nonfiction that is yucky spinach. And then I had children asking me, can you make a book that has many notable people in one book? So I don't have to go here and read a book about Frederick Douglass, and then I have to find another book about Jackie Robinson, and then I have to find another book about Martin Luther King Jr. Can you please make one book where all the 10 men appear in one book? So I said, that's a great idea, and I'm on it. Now, the other thing was, when I started Hand in Hand, There were many things that I didn't realize about some of the men that are featured in the book. And if you read each of the narratives, each one starts with what the person was like as a child. And there were little known things. For example, one of the men in the book is Thurgood Marshall, Supreme Court Justice who argued on behalf of school segregation in a case known as Brown versus Board of Education. What I didn't realize was that Thurgood Marshall actually started his legal career in the 3rd grade. Thurgood Marshall was a prankster. He got in trouble all the time. There's 8-year-old Thurgood Marshall getting in trouble. His principal finally said, "You are going to go to the basement of school. That is your punishment. And as part of your reprimand, we are going to give you a book of the American Constitution. And you, Thurgood Marshall, 8 years old, must memorize the American Constitution." And there's Thurgood Marshall, 8 years old in the 3rd grade, reading the 14th and 15th Amendments and memorizing them and thinking, something ain't right here. I'm living a certain kind of life, and here's what it says in the Constitution. And then it got to the point where Thurgood Marshall would make himself get in trouble so that he could go into the basement of the school and read the 14th and 15th Amendments. And then he grew up and he remembered what he had read in the 14th and 15th Amendments. And that is how he kind of began his legal journey. So there were many stories like that of these men and what they were like as young people and how that impacted what they became today. And that is how I attempted to write a book about nonfiction that is not yucky spinach and hopefully very fun and compelling to read.
So as the illustrator of this book, thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you.
I thought that I have to make pictures that are very appealing to young people. And as an illustrator, that's what I do. And I want to talk a little bit about how I got started as an illustrator. A lot of you all may know this, but my father is Jerry Pinkney. Yes. You know, phenomenal illustrator. So when I was a little boy, I had the honor of watching him make his pictures. He always had a studio in our house, and he would love for me to come and visit him in his studio. He would love for me to come home from school and just chat with him for a little while. I would talk about my homework, or I would talk about my soccer game, and I would usually have to talk about how badly we lost, because my soccer team actually lost every game, but I don't want to talk about that. But while he was cheering me up, he would always continue to draw, and I would watch him. And that's how I learned, by watching him. It wasn't so much that he taught me how to draw, it was more that I just observed it. And there are 3 things that I observed about my dad that stay with me today. One is that he was extremely creative. And I'm creative, and it was just something I knew that I was as a child, and I think all children are creative. And that comes in 2 parts. I think part of it is kind of that internal place of using our imagination. Like, I loved making things. And my father used to love watching me when I would make things. Like, I used to remember making machines. I used to love to try to make, like, I remember once I tried to make a hydrofoil. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a boat that hovers on the top of water. And I actually looked at pictures of hydrofoils and got balsam wood and would cut it up, and I glued it together, and then I got a fan from another toy and put it on the bottoms. I thought when the fan spun, that would lift it up, and I put a little motor on it, and I actually put it in the bathtub and turned it on, and it sunk. But I was very creative, and I thought I made a submarine. And I thought, you know, so that other part of being creative is that kind of imagination, and the other part is being curious. Being curious about what's out there around us and how to kind of incorporate those 2 things, being curious and my imagination. And it's just something I did all day long. Even in school, I spent a lot of time in my imagination. The teachers didn't know what to do with me a lot of times because of that. I used to love to sit in the back of the classroom, and I would bring all my little objects and things that I would create, and I'd have them in my desk, and the teacher would be going on in the background about something. I don't know what. But I would be creating these stories, and my teachers would come and see that I was very creative, and they learned how to use that. And they would give me extra credit projects to do. Like, I remember doing a poster for the science room about how a tadpole becomes a frog, and I illustrated all the stages. I remember doing another poster of all the bones in the human body for the science room, and I labeled them all. And when I think back on it now, I realize that's what my dad does. Those were my first illustrations. I learned how to illustrate children's books by watching my dad, and I would help him out in his studio, because whenever he was doing a book about, let's say, a little boy from Africa, he would dress me up like I lived in Africa. He'd read the story to me. I'd have to act out the adventure in the book. He would take pictures of me with his camera and do his sketches from those pictures. He was doing a book about a little boy from India. He would do the same thing, dress me up like I lived in India. I'd have to model for him. He'd read the story to me, and he'd take pictures of me and do his drawings from that. I even remember one day my sister wasn't home, and my father needed a girl model. So he dressed me up as a girl. Yeah. And I learned about what it is to be creative and always think outside the box and how do you solve a problem and make it interesting. And those are one of the things that I did. So when I was doing this book, hand in hand, I thought, how can I make these portraits interesting? And I thought, in my studio, I love to play. And one of the things that I learned from my dad is something called a happy accident. And what it is when you're working with watercolor, which is very watery, and you have to figure out, how can I draw something with watercolor where it's like going all over the place and making a mess. And I remember telling my dad, whenever I use watercolor, I keep making a mess. He calls that a happy accident. Because then I would turn those swirls into the pictures. So what I decided to do with Hand in Hand is I had to do these portraits. And I wanted them to be kind of really interesting. And I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but of course, using my imagination and just being curious, I had a lot of books around me. And I love looking at art books whenever I'm working. And I had books from Vincent van Gogh, books from famous African-American artists like Aaron Douglas. And I also had books about African masks. And one day I decided that I just want to paint some African masks. And I started painting them in bright colors. And then I had about 50 paintings of African masks. And I thought, well, I have 10 men. I'm going to look at these paintings I did of African masks, and whichever one looks like Frederick Douglass, I'm going to paint his face on top of it. And that's what I did. So then I'd have another African mask, and I think, this looks like Barack Obama, kind of. And, you know, the African masks were great because they're very noble and very dignified and very sculptural. And when I would just paint on top of it the different faces of the people that we know, it gave this psychological resonance where they became very powerful. So I thought I would do a little drawing for you all that may kind of illustrate what I mean. See if you all can see this. So what I would do, again, I'm going to use some colored markers. I would just draw this is going to be kind of an African mask. You know, they're very kind of sculptural, right? But then I would just use like different colors, kind of in places that I thought would look kind of interesting. And again, right now, this is what I talk about a happy accident. I feel like I'm making a mess right now. And as a creative person, I love making a mess. Because then I can make this chaos into order later. So just do kind of things like this, and maybe there'd be a lot of red on this side. Maybe I'll use a little green. Does that look like a mess to you all? Good. Now I know I'm on to something. See what else we have in here. Ooh, orange. What kind of mess can I make with orange? All right, so I'm just going to like leave that like that for now. So this is kind of what I would have, all these paintings in my studio of just bright colors that kind of look like African masks. And then I thought, now I'm going to turn it into a person. So right now, I'm going to turn this into Andrea. Yes. We've been married for a long time, for 22 years. So I really know what she looks like. So first off, I love to do eyes. And then maybe her nose.
I'm glad I got my brows waxed.
I just got a nice little nose. Yeah, I think it's really important to understand eyebrows. You know, when I'm doing a portrait, I always talk about the different features, and eyebrows are very important because everyone has different eyebrows. Some people have fluffy eyebrows, some people have little thin eyebrows like me, and some people have those nice little pointy ones like Andrea's that I think she gets some pluck sometimes. I'm not really sure about that, though. So this is just going to be a sketch. Sketch meaning it's not a perfect drawing, but it's just going to be a sketch of Andrea. Let me get her lips in here. Curly little hair. Put that on there. And, ooh, her earrings. So let's see. To stand back and take a look at it. How's it coming out? All right, sometimes when you're an artist, you have to put your thumb out like this, because artists do that. Everyone try to put your thumb out like this and squint your eyes. To tell you the truth, I really don't know why artists do this, but you feel really artsy when you do it, though. So let's get her glasses on there, too. So this is kind of a sketch of how I was doing the portraits for Hand in Hand. So if I ever do a book about 10 black females that changed America, I can put Andrea in there. Talk about working together. Working together. Want to start?
So the question often comes up, how is it that you work together and stay happily married? What a lot of folks don't realize is that authors and illustrators usually do not meet each other. They don't go to Starbucks, they don't collaborate, they don't get together, they don't talk about the books. But we are in a unique situation. I am married to the guy that is illustrating a lot of my books. We are sharing the same box of cereal, the same tube of toothpaste. How do we do that? How do we keep it happy?
Well, first of all, we had to come out with some guidelines because we wanted to stay happily married for a long time. And we came up with different guidelines, and one of them is that we always have a meeting when we talk about our work. We don't just talk about it while we're walking around the house. On Saturdays, we go to a little cafe. We live in Brooklyn, New York, and we bring out all the things that we're working on, and we talk about them there. And you can't say something like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, because you're not supposed to say that in a meeting. You have to say things very nicely, and we came up with different ways of phrasing things. For example, if Andrea's looking at my artwork, because she has a great eye for artwork and details, if she sees something that doesn't look right, like if she sees somebody's foot, she can't say his foot looks like a football, because that really hurts my feelings. She has to say something like, the foot looks unresolved. And then I can hear that, and then I can take that in and, make up some excuse and fix it.
And my rule for Brian is that he has read my manuscripts, he's made notes in the margins, put Post-it notes on. If it's wonderful or terrible, he must always begin by saying, honey, you're off to a good start. I see what you're going for, and that's how we keep the meeting really positive. So we're going to talk for a minute about this, which led to this book, Martin and Mahalia. I will say that one of the reasons I love to come to the National Book Festival is that I am in the city of my birth. I was born in Washington, D.C., and as many of us, yes, right? As many of us know, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And in celebration of the book, March on Washington, we created this book, Martin and Mahalia. What I didn't know, also, and I love research for this reason, is that Martin Luther King Jr. and the gospel singer Mahalia Jackson were friends. And it was the power of their voices that helped move the civil rights movement forward. So when it was time to come with 250,000 marchers, Martin Luther King Jr. invited his friend Mahalia Jackson. He said, I need your help. And so she came. She sang at that March on Washington. She quieted down the crowd of 250,000 people waiting to hear the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. There she was singing, I've been buked and I've been scorned. And then when the crowd was quiet, there was Martin Luther King Jr. reading prepared remarks, reading from something that he had written down. And it was Mahalia Jackson who turned to him and said, tell them about your dream, Martin. And that's when the script went away. And that's when Martin Luther King delivered the I Have a Dream speech as we know it today. So we have about, do you want to talk about the artwork quickly?
Yes, I would love to.
Please do that.
So one of the things that happened when Andrea wrote her story is after she's written it, she gives it to me. And then I read it and have to find out by using my imagination, my creativity, and my curiosity, how can I make these pictures come to life? And the story come to life. And there were a couple things that Andrea had in her story. She talked about a dove that kind of lead the way. She talked about a map, because there was actually a map that was given out. So I wanted to use the map in my artwork. And also because Martin and Mahalia kind of had similar childhoods. They both grew up in the church, and they both wanted to communicate using language. I thought I wanted to always put the language actually in the artwork. So I would actually put some of the words in the artwork. There's also a dove on every page. And also, whenever I introduce Martin Luther King, I make sure the whole page has a lot of blues and greens. Then when Mahalia, when we talk about her, I use lots of reds and oranges. So you see the spreads are mostly red, pink, orange with Mahalia, and blue and green with Martin Luther King. This is a spread that has a map. Again, I wanted to use that motif of a map. And it looks very similar to the map that the marchers used when they were coming to Washington. And I want to show you a spread that I think is really kind of cool. Where is it? Here it is. So I talked about how I use a dove in all of the spreads, always leading the way. Can you all see where the dove is in this picture? You can see it? Where is it? There are words, yes. I put the words in the shape of a dove.
Okay, so, did you want to?
I wanted you to talk about this one.
Okay, so yes, so that is the moment. Tell them about your dream, Martin. Now, we are getting out of time, but I want to kind of end by having a quick reenactment of that moment. So, I am going to, remember, we are all committed. We are going to hear the I Have a Dream speech. But one thing, as we cite in the book, is that music led that movement forward. So I'm going to sing something. I'm going to give you the hand, and I would like you to echo it back to me. I'm on my way, to Freedom Land. I'm on my way, to Freedom Land. I'm on my way, to Freedom Land. I'm on my way to Freedom Land. Give yourselves a big round of applause for being such great singers. Questions? We have about 2 minutes for questions. So if anybody has any, we are happy to take them.
And I think they go to the microphone there if you have a question. Does anyone have a question? I can't hardly see.
I see a question.
You do? Okay.
Who were the 10 black men?
Who are the 10 black men in the book? Thank you for asking. The 10 black men are Benjamin Banneker, Frederick Douglass, Thurgood Marshall, A. Philip Randolph. These are not in order. Barack Obama, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Jackie Robinson. Booker T. Washington. And who's the 10? W.B. Du Bois. Yes, thank you for that question. A moment of trivia.
Over here.
Yes.
Do you also have a side job besides being an author and an illustrator?
Do I have a side job? Yes, I am a background dancer with Beyonce's. You know, put a ring on it? No. I work as a children's book editor at Scholastic. That's my day job. And some of my authors are here. The wonderful Catherine Erskine is here talking about her books. So I work with Catherine and Walter D. Myers and Christopher Paul Curtis and many, many wonderful authors. So that's what I'm doing from 9 to 5. And my other job is back in New York City, named 2 young people. I have 2 teenagers, so that's my first and main job. Yeah. Do you have another job?
This
Can
is
I know
it.
about-
I just illustrate books and come and talk to children about what I do.
Okay.
On that note, this question is for Mr. Pinkney. I'm an aspiring illustrator myself,
Okay.
and a great admirer of yours. But I'm curious to know how you pace yourself with your illustrations, whether you try to devote a certain amount of time to every drawing once you have the basic structure of your book worked out.
You know, every book is different for some reason. And one thing I realize is that I can't come up with a system. Because if I come up with a system for one book, I start another book, and it totally kind of goes away. So what I do is I make sure I'm always inspired, for one thing. So I'm always having a lot of work around me that I can look at that inspires me. And the idea is that if I get in the studio every day, if I could make like 10 sketches, 10 drawings, that's a good day. So sometimes they may be sketches for a book I'm working on. Sometimes they may be just things, objects that I see around the room. Because I think the main thing is I have to be making art.
Thank you. Incidentally, I met your father years ago at Politics and Prose.
Yeah, he's a great guy, isn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
He is.
So we have time for one more question. I see a young man here. What's your question? Nice and loud.
How many books have you guys done together?
How many books have we done together?
It's 20?
20-something.
Thanks.
I think we're out of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.